We're talking today with Mr. Charles Shapin of Massapequa, New York. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Shapin, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? For instance, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised in Brooklyn, New York. Of course, we moved around in a few neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
My principal neighborhood was a section called Sheepshead Bay, which is right up near the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And
What did your family do? What did your father do for a living?
my father was in the wholesale fish business.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was a housewife. They were both born in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to, I was going to high school at the time. And it was, I'll never forget, it was one Sunday morning. It was a Sunday morning, December 7th. I used to play handball. We had a very mild day. I played handball. And I came back to watch. The Brooklyn Dodgers had a professional football team, and they were playing the Giants that day. And they had never beaten the Giants throughout their history. And that we were listening to the game, and all of a sudden they broke in about Japanese planes bombing, and it was sort of garbled. And you sometimes used to get phony or misinformation, but after a while began to realize it was the real thing. And I remember my parents sent me out that night to pick up some delicatessen for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized the world had changed.
What was different? Just in the atmosphere out there in the streets?
The atmosphere, the whole idea of the war, and it was very bad at first. I remember the darkest moment for me was when Singapore fell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the Prince of Wales and the Repulse were both the
That's right.
cream of the British Navy
Right.
was sunk. And then the Japanese had invaded the Philippines. You know, Singapore, the fortress of fortresses,
Right.
fell almost without firing a shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, had you been paying any attention to what was going on in Europe before
Oh
Pearl
yes,
Harbor?
oh yes. We remember. I think I was 13 or 14, and when Chamberlain made peace with Hitler, we knew you couldn't make peace with Hitler. A peace in our time, we knew. Most dictators, their word is worthless. So we knew this was just a temporary thing. But Chamberlain was the big hero. He came waving that
Right.
paper, peace in our. There was no peace in our time.
That's what the voters wanted, so we gave it to him
Yeah.
for a while. But, yeah. So now, did you have much of an understanding at that point of what was going on in Germany or what Hitler was doing and that
Oh
kind of
yes,
thing?
we knew about the Nazis. We didn't know about we knew of the concentration camps. We didn't know of the death camps. We knew the persecution of the Jews, the gypsies. They didn't mention too much about the persecution of the homosexuals. That didn't come out. But we knew.
Yeah. So the
And we
information
had-
was there for people if they were
In
paying
fact,
attention.
we had some refugees coming over. So we had a few refugee kids, German kids, coming into school. Because I was in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and they were the bulk of the refugees.
Right.
These kids coming in.
Okay, so you probably had a better idea than most American teenagers, maybe, of what was going on there
Yeah.
already.
Yeah,
Now, at that time, were you figuring that sooner or later we were going to get into that war?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not us so much. We knew something was going to happen. But Roosevelt, I remember Roosevelt making one of his speeches. They were worried about our participation. He made the speech, and he said, a friend of mine when I was in the Army used to quote him, "And let me tell you, mothers and fathers, that your sons will not be sent overseas to fight in a foreign war," the way he said it. Well, we were being shelled, this buddy of mine used to repeat, "And let me tell you, mothers and fathers, and let me tell you again and again."
Yeah. Of course, at the same time, he was also putting through policies like Lend-Lease.
Lend-Lease,
he had already
selective service.
federalized the National Guard. There was building up defense industry. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
Oh yeah, and the General Pershing getting on the radio about the 50 destroyers for naval bases. We knew that Roosevelt, and they were starting to convoy ships. Convoying ships is an act of war.
Right.
But the Germans were afraid to do anything. But we knew. But we were sympathetic. Everybody was sympathetic to the British.
Right. Okay. Then of course Pearl Harbor hits, and then all of a sudden there
well, that was,
you're in a war. But
then we knew we were in. And what most people overlook is that Germany declared war on us 2 days later. Most people think we declared a war on Germany. We did not. That was I remember, I was going to high school, and I think it was about 1 or 2 days later.
It was.
I used to pass by a newsstand on my way home, and there was a headline, Germany declares war on U.S. That was a shock.
Yeah. And it's still one of those things where people wonder why he made that particular mistake, but
I think that was one of Hitler's biggest mistakes.
Made it a lot easier for the rest of us. Then, okay, so you heard about that. Now, at this point, you're 17 at that point?
I was 17 and a half, actually. Well, I was born in August. This was December. I wasn't much over 17. The day after Pearl Harbor, they had all the seniors go into the auditorium. We heard Roosevelt's speech.
Okay. And did a lot of the guys from your high school then just go and enlist right away?
No, not that I knew. Then I started college. A couple of months later, I was a senior. I had skipped a term, so when I was 17 and a half, I was graduated from high school, and I went into college, and then the fellows were going in.
Right. Okay. Now, did you want to enlist yourself?
Yeah.
All right. Now, there was a rule there that said you can enlist at 17 if your parents gave you permission.
Right. My parents went. I told you then. Then they lowered the draft age to 18, and that's when I asked for immediate induction.
All right. And what was the response at the draft board when you went in there?
Oh, I think I mentioned.
But not on camera.
Oh, well, I went to the draft board, and there were a bunch of people there wanting to get deferred. And this fellow said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to go in. I want to sign a waiver." "Oh, here's a chair. Sit down and make yourself comfortable."
Okay. Now, once you had done that and you signed up, then basically what happened? What's the induction process?
Yes, you had to go down. Well, they gave you a week to settle your affairs, and then you were supposed to assemble at the draft board, and you would go. The fellows who were going on active duty that day would all go down together. I forgot where we had a report, someplace in New York, to the Army station. I met a fella I'd known from high school. We'd been in many classes together, and as it happens, we went in the same day and we got out the same day. I'm still communicate with him, and we were all out the outfits together. It was amazing. In fact, when we left, we were discharged, we came home from Europe came home on an aircraft carrier, and I remember when we were pulling out of England, I said, "Ken, it's over."
All right. Now, you go down, you kind of muster in in New York and so forth, and then where do they send you from there?
The first stop was Camp Upton on Long Island. That was made famous by Irving Berlin when he did about the Army. And they kept us there for maybe 4 or 5 days, and then they gave shipping orders. So we marched us down to the railroad yard there, and they put us on a Long Island Railroad and to, I guess it was Penn Station, and there was a train waiting for us. The Long Island Railroad is a local commuter train, and there was a train waiting for us, a troop train, and they had us run across the platform and get on the troop train, and it pulled out, and we noticed we were heading south. We were heading Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, Washington, Richmond, and we knew we were going someplace south. And the next afternoon, we ended up in a field. The train got off the siding, and we were in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then the officers came over, and I saw they were wearing field artillery insignia on their collars, and I knew we were in the field artillery.
Now,
Well,
had they done any testing or anything like that back at Fort Upton, or was that just?
no, that was yeah. They gave you some sort of physical. I don't recall, but they had given us a physical when we first when you had a report first for a physical.
Right.
The day you were given when you passed, you were given a week.
Right.
Well, I had passed the physical. I wasn't sure. A fella came over, and he said, "You know, son, you got a perforated eardrum." Well, that meant you were out. And he saw the look on my face, and he said, I'll prove it to you. So he calls over another doctor. Here, come over and look at this fella's ear. And I'll never forget, the second doctor turned to him, and he said, "Hey, dummy," he says, "take a look at this guy's ear. When I blow on it, eardrum, it moves. So it means he's okay." So when I was accepted, they stamped special assignment.
Ah.
So I said, "What does special assignment mean?" "Oh, because of your ear, they'll probably put you in the ground crew of the Air Corps or something, you know, something like that. Well, what could you do?" So here I am. I'm now in the field artillery, and I found out I was in a 240 millimeter howitzer, which was the biggest gun in
Right.
the field artillery.
That's like a
It's about 9.5
nine and a
inches.
half inch gun. Yeah, that's huge.
It's a big one, yeah. So here I am.
On the other hand, if your ears were already shot anyway, then it wouldn't make any
It
difference.
weren't. Well, as it turned out, I was never, very rarely on the guns, because they put me in. I had a math background. I finished. I finished a year of college.
Right.
Maybe I have my dates mixed up. I was in college for a year before that's when they lowered the draft
Right,
age to
right.
18. I was 18 and a half. So I was in a survey section. So it's very rarely on the guns. So
Right.
I didn't get that bang. But,
Okay.
you heard it.
Let's kind of get ourselves back then here. You've made it into Fort Bragg. You realize you're in an artillery unit. What did they start having you guys do once you got there?
Well, drilling, of course. And then we would do worked on. I was in a survey section. So we used the transit, the naming circle. We had to do various exercises and field exercises. And I did the taping. I remember we once had to tape 5,000 feet with 100 feet tape. And then it didn't come out right.
Oh,
So this other guy said, "You did it wrong."
can you explain what taping is for people?
Well,
who
you
won't
go
necessarily
take a
know?
steel tape. It's 100 foot.
Right.
And you go along, and there's another. It's a team of two. So the rear man lines up the front man. So you're in a straight line, and they drop pins, metal pins, and you put the tape through the. It's a pin with a
hole in it? Yeah.
hole,
Right.
you know, with a loop.
Right.
So the tape goes through the loop, and you yell "stretch, stick, stuck." And you keep doing this, and the second guy was supposed to count the pin. He put the pins on his belt and count them, and somebody made a mistake. This guy said, "All right, we'll come out and do it with you." We were off maybe by 2 inches.
Oh, okay.
And I remember one survey we did, they would go from a U.S. Coast and Geodetic service benchmark. They have concrete benchmarks. And the lieutenant always had a list of the benchmarks and the coordinates. And one day, we did a survey. We came so close. It's called a closed survey because you start at a known position and you end at a known position. Oh, what a wonderful job! Nobody told him. We messed up a rod. I forgot the name we used to. It's a red and white pole. And you stick it in the ground, you know, after the transit is there, you put it, then he looks back.
Right.
We had forgotten where the pole belonged, so we just stuck it in. So we had what was called a compensating error. So that's why it came out perfect.
Okay. Now, what was the point of all of this? Why were you doing
The
all
survey was to locate on the grid map the location of the targets. Well, that wasn't done too easily. But observation point, the OP, and the gun positions, because they worked off a grid. The Army had a grid map of everywhere
Right.
in Europe, and we worked. It wasn't. We didn't use magnetic north. We used something called grid north, and they measured. Everything was measured in a clockwise direction from grid north. It was called a y-azimuth, and our job was to locate accurately. Once if you knew where your guns were, and you knew where your OP was,
That's the observation post?
yeah, then you'd have a much better job of controlling your fire. And so we'd go out and do the survey, and I remember once, so we had to go right up to the guns to get their position. I wondered and I was taping up to the gun muzzle, and this one character starts yelling, "Fire mission!" Now, if you're in front of an artillery piece when it goes off, you can get killed from the concussion.
Right.
So we started running, and he started laughing.
Right. Now, what sort of people were you working with at this point? I mean, who was kind of training with you?
My first unit was mainly from New York. And regular run of New York people, average people. There were some characters there. And of course, basic training, they teach you about military courtesy. I remember this one lieutenant was giving us a talk on saluting. So he says, now he says, you salute the uniform, not the man. He said, and he points to some fellow, a rather nondescript looking fellow. And he said, if this man and I were on the beach and we were in bathing suits, is there anyone here who could tell which was the officer and which was the enlisted man? So this one character, he wasn't a wise guy. I could, sir. How could you? You're much younger and prettier, sir. And then another time we had a question, the lieutenant is telling us about the gas mask. When you put the gas mask on, you're supposed to open a little, take a sniff, and blow it out just to make sure the gas mask is working properly. So this one guy says, Lieutenant, what do? You're in a gas attack, and you put on your gas mask, and you find that it has a leak. So the lieutenant says, I guess you get one of these TS slips that the sergeant was talking about. Oh, well, the TS, the T stands for tough.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, about how long did they have you down at Fort Bragg?
I was in Fort Bragg until November of 1943, and then we went into I had applied, and my buddy Ken had applied for ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Program, and so we were sent to Florida, just the two of us, to John B. Stetson University at DeLand, Florida. And we stayed there, and you didn't do much. They gave you some refresher course in math and physics because I had done well on my math. I didn't have to take that. So we played football and tried to make out with the local girls. And it was lovely there. And then they sent us to another unit, Rollins College, which was a real paradise. It had a swimming lake. We were housed in dorms. Ken and I had a private room. And it was just nice, and he used to say, what's going to happen when they send us back to the Army?
Now, this was an officer training program? Was that the idea?
What was that?
Was this supposed to be an officer training program or just
no, it's
specialized?
called basic engineering. What they were going to do with us, heaven knows.
Okay, yeah, because they had a whole string of, there was one for engineers in particular, and so that's the one you were in.
And what happened, then they sent us to CCNY, New York. But it was a grind there. And they made you work, they had supervised study at night. Well, they folded the whole program after 5 weeks.
Right.
They decided they had had so many casualties in North Africa that here these guys are just having a good time. We're going to fold the program, but they put us all in the infantry.
Right.
So we were sent to, I was put in the 75th Infantry Division, which was on maneuvers at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And that was a something. So you went out into the woods there, and all they had were wild pigs and ticks. It was a real end of the world. In fact, after every problem, you and a buddy used to you have a buddy, and you take all your clothes off. And I remember when I told it to the college kids, they all laughed because they're thinking of homosexuals. It wasn't that. You got naked, and your buddy looked your body over for ticks.
Right.
And the way we used to get rid of them was to take a lighted cigarette and hold it to the tick's rear end, and he'd pull out. Of course, they told us if you pull the tick out, his head is liable to come off, and then you can get an infection. Now I understand they've changed the procedure, but I remember we pulled the ticks out. I had scars. I had scars that lasted for several years. They would get you around the belt. They get under there. And we were on maneuvers, and we'd walk through, and there's a stream, and there's a bridge, and there's an umpire saying, "You can't go over the bridge, it's been blown up."
And at this point, were you doing infantry training, or had you?
Infantry.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd given me an M1, and we were doing infantry training. We had to cross the Shapin River in assault boats, and I wasn't very happy because we had to walk all the time. And I remember opposing us was the 92nd Division, an all-black division. And while we're crossing the Shapin River in the assault boats, there you can see these black soldiers standing up shooting blanks at us. And I said, if I gotta get killed and my feet hurt, when we get back to camp, I'm going to go back into the artillery if I can. And I'd had 10 months of artillery. So I went, we got back to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky. I went over to the artillery, and I was interviewed by a warrant officer. I still remember his name, Mr. Tucker. A warrant officer is called, he's saluted by enlisted men, but he's not really an officer, he's sort of a mixed. And he's called Mr. And I was interviewed by Mr. Tucker. Okay, he says, we're going to put you back in the field artillery. So I've had volunteered for overseas service in the field artillery. And a couple of days later, the orders came through. And I went to the artillery. I went to my new commanding officer. I was put in headquarters battery. And he said to me, I see you haven't had a furlough for some time. Do you have any money? I didn't have any, but he said, sure, because if you didn't have any money, well, we'll have to wait.
Right.
So, oh yeah, okay, we'll give you a furlough tonight. And I didn't have any money. I went over to my friends in the infantry and borrowed money. And I expected to go overseas. So I went home. And in fact, before I went home, they said, oh, you haven't qualified on the 45. You have to go out to the transition course. And they had me fly at a 45. Well, my ears were ringing till I got to New York. We used to have a joke about a 45. Some fella had messed up. So the joke was, we'll give him a gun with one bullet. We'll make it a 45. He'll be said, you can't hit anything with a 45. So I went home on furlough. And then I came back, and I said, when do I go overseas? Oh, while you were away, the War Department changed the rules. You have to be in the outfit 6 weeks before they can transfer you to overseas. So this was, I guess, March of 1944. I went over with that outfit in November of 44, so I stayed.
Okay. Now, was this the outfit that you would go into combat with at that point?
I beg your pardon?
Was this the outfit that you would actually go with?
Yes, I went into combat with them.
So it was an artillery battalion attached to the 75th Division still?
It was part of a division. In fact, I was never a replacement. Even my first outfit was a regular artillery battalion.
Right.
551st Field Artillery Battalion. So some used to go to replacement centers. I never had that.
Right.
I was always in a line outfit.
Yeah. I was trying to piece together the bits a little bit because you were assigned as an infantryman to the 75th Division, and then
Transferred to
to
artillery.
the artillery in the 75th Division, but then you got out of sync because of the furlough and so forth, but you still wound up in a battalion that was attached to that same division.
I was, well, I had 10 months field artillery experience
Right.
at the time I went in, and I was put back in the survey section.
Right.
So I knew what
So you were doing what you were trained for.
I was doing what I was trained for. Yeah, infantry. I was a rifleman.
Okay. So when they finally do then ship you overseas, what was the ocean trip like?
It was November of 1944.
44 rather, yeah.
It was smooth as glass. We went over unescorted. It was the British ship Aquitania, His Majesty's ship Aquitania. We had 2 meals a day, and the English can destroy any food you give them. And it was terrible. The guys were complaining and complaining, and then it was announced that the general of the artillery section of the division was going to inspect our quarters the next day. And so the fellows are running around. And if the general asks me, and they always do, in an inspection, they always, soldier, you getting enough to eat? How's the food? They always ask. So he says, and if the general asks me about the food, I'm going to say, sir, wrong. Well, what happens? The general comes in, and we're lined up behind next to our bunks, and he goes by, and the general always is followed by an army of flunkies. So when the general stops, he stops, and you hear all the flunkies' heels clicking when they stop. He goes down the first row, he doesn't say anything. He goes down the second row, and he stops. Oh, soldier, he says, how's the food here? Are you getting enough to eat? Oh, yes, sir. Well, after the general left, they were going to kill him. I had experiences with, in my first outfit, we were on a training mission, and the Army made up nicknames for everybody. There was always nicknames. We had a full colonel in charge of our battalion. He had no hair. He was referred to as the Bald Eagle. We had another character who was called Hambone. He was a total misfit for the Army, and he had very bad personal habits. He never bathed, and when he marched, he took 3 steps, everybody's 4. And I remember overhearing this conversation with his, near the captain's office, the orderly room. And I remember his sergeant coming in, and I could hear the sergeant saying, sir, he says, I want to talk to you about this here, Kramer. So the sergeant, what is it, sergeant? He says, he don't ever take a bath. Some of the men got sick. He says, sir, the men are complaining. So the captain says, well, when I was in VM, they were from the South. When I was in VMI, we had a man like that, and we don't give him a GI bath, with a GI brush and a GI soap, and that did it. Oh, well, Captain, so we done tried that. We call the guy was called Hambone.
All right. Okay. Now let's see. So you make it across. So you're on an ocean liner, so it sails fast enough. You're not worrying about U-boats and things like that much.
Well, they are worried about U-boats, but we made it.
Yep.
We landed in Gourock, I think, which is the port for Scotland, for Glasgow.
Yeah.
We sent us to Cardiff, Wales. The worst climate in the world. It rained every day, and British had kept daylight saving time in the winter, but in Cardiff, they're so far north. 4 o'clock, 3:30, it got dark.
Right.
And we were there for a couple of weeks, and then they put us on the LST, and we went to Rem, whatever you pronounce it, and we got off the Seine. It's amazing, and the kids are all talking French. Isn't that something?
All right. Now, did you have any impressions of Cardiff or Britain or whatever beyond just that it rained?
I beg your pardon?
Did you remember anything else about the stay in Britain before you shipped over, other than it rained a lot?
Yeah, well, we got we got passes to London a couple of times. In fact, we had you could get a taxi and they take you around, and we actually saw Winston Churchill as we passed the end. You couldn't get into Downing Street; there was a gate, but as you passed down the gate, we saw Winston Churchill getting into a car, and the driver says, "I've been here all my life, and I've never seen him, and you fellas catch him the first time." And then this old Englishman stops us, and he says, "You know, the bombing exposed an old wall which was built by the Romans." And I remember the driver said, the cab says, "He's a queer one, that one. He must have pots of money." And we would get a pass. And one day I'm there, and I met this very pretty English, I think they were ATS, they were equivalent to the WACs, a very pretty girl. And I'm taking her to the station, I think it was Paddington or one of them. And the MPs come by, "Where's your pass, soldier?" I'm like, you know, it's not the right kind of pass, we're taking you in. Felt like a damn fool. So they take me back to MP headquarters, and the officer said, "Oh, your outfit, I see. They weren't supposed to give you this pass. Your pass is not supposed to it's not supposed to have your outfit mentioned. So when you get back to camp, when you get back to your post, please tell the," and that was it. But I ruined the date.
Right.
I remember her name to this day, Molly Fletcher. And then we went to, they had us march out at night, and went down to the train. I think it was either Southampton or one of those pilots, and they put us on the LST.
Right.
Well, after the ride on the British ship, we're going on a ship again, we're going to starve. So the guys had K rations stuffed and all kinds of food. It was run by it was a U.S. Navy, and they had great food.
Yep.
Very nice, really. We were on it for 3 days, and they had given us Dramamine for the channel, but it was so smooth they threw we threw Dramamine over the side. It was just wonderful.
You got lucky. And LST was not a great ship to ride in if it was
No,
rough at all.
but in fact, I met one of the sailors. It was a neighbor of mine back home.
Okay. Now they land you in Rouen, so it's late in, was it sort of now December 44?
November.
Okay.
Early December.
Early December.
By that time it was maybe December 10th, and the Bulge had broken out. Of course, we didn't know, Bulge broke out on the 15th.
Yeah, 14th,
So
15th.
it must have been after the 15th.
Okay.
And we were riding. We were riding, well, we stopped in France, and interesting thing, the captain needed an interpreter. So we had a Cajun in our outfit, LeBlanc. So the captain appointed LeBlanc as his interpreter while we were in France. And I remember LeBlanc comes up to me one day. He says, "You know, Shapin, these people don't know how to speak French." But as we're riding through France, and especially as we get near the Belgian border, the people are waving at us and giving us flowers and cheering us. I said, "What's going on here?" We still don't know about the Belgians. I said, "They've seen GIs before. What's the big deal?" Well, of course, they knew. They were expecting the Germans might come back, and they were very glad to see us. Of course, I was manning the machine gun on our truck.
Top of the
Because
truck,
I
yeah.
had also been sent to machine gun school when we were in the States. I was sent to Fort Fisher, North Carolina. It was in the summer, and when you finish the machine gun school, they would take you down to the resort area, Carolina Beach, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I remember the last day we used to shoot at targets towed by planes, and the last day we finished up early, and the lieutenant said, "I'm not allowed to give you passes till 5 o'clock, so we're going down to Carolina Beach as a detail. Meet me under the Ferris wheel at 5 o'clock for your passes." So I was manning the machine gun, and in Belgium and France,
Mm-hmm.
the people would say, "Pour la Boche, pour la Boche."
All right. Okay. Now, do you remember what the weather was like at that point?
The sun was out at first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had snow, and it got cold, quite cold. But the first couple of days was sunny, and then there were some clouds. I don't remember this too well, but I remember that. Yeah, it had clouds had cleared. That's right. It was cloudy coming up. There was snow, but when we finally got into action, we saw the clouds had broken, and the B-17s came over, and we saw them being shot down. You can see the ACAC, the German ACAC. You can see it's like an orange flash. All of a sudden, you see a plane go down, and there was a dogfight. And when we got into the line, that they were going into the line tomorrow. Then they told us about the Bulge. They said, be careful, the Germans have dropped paratroopers in and spies in, so be very alert. Ask them all kinds of questions. You know, God help a guy who didn't know who won the World Series the year before. Well, a fellow wasn't a baseball fan. How many home runs did Babe Ruth hit? You were supposed to ask the Germans questions that only an American would know.
Right.
So God helping a guy who didn't know. Well, anyway, we're supposed to go into the line. Oh yeah, this is what happened. If you're going into the line tomorrow, you're opposing the First S Panzer Division, who massacred a bunch of soldiers in Malmedy. That's where we were. Don't take any prisoners, and don't get taken yourself. And then, okay, and I'm on guard duty, and it's dark, and there's a bush there. And the lieutenant comes over, and I said, you know, Lieutenant, I'm not sure if that's a bush or a man. Looking at the move. Oh, he says it's a bush, but as he goes away, I hear him cocking his 45. Officers used to carry a 45 in the field artillery. Enlisted men carried a carbine. Carbine, especially in my first artillery outfit, they didn't give us carbines. They gave us Lee Enfield
These are bolt action rifles.
Not only that, it was from M1917.
Right. World War I model.
Right. When you fired it, you got to get a new shoulder. It hurt like the devil, and it had a kick. None of that. They were packed in grease called cosmoline, thick, heavy grease, and we had to clean it out. What a job! You couldn't get it out. You go to the sergeant, just clean. No, he says there's. I see cosmoline here. I see cosmoline there. We had one old-time sergeant though who knew McCork. I'll never forget him from Louisiana. He solved the problem. He put them in a wash tub. He put this rifle in a wash tub, got on hot water, put in GI soap, and he scrubbed the whole rifle, and that did it. But that hurt. And then when when I was infantry, the M1, that wasn't bad. But the carbine is nice and light.
Yep.
In fact, I made sharpshooter with it. The thing was so off, though. In order to hit the bullseye, I had to hit the lower right-hand edge of the ground next to it. I had to aim at that, not give me bullseyes.
Yeah, well, they were designed more to shoot out a lot of bullets quickly than they were to hit anything.
I beg your pardon?
They were designed more to shoot a lot of bullets quickly rather than to hit something. So.
Yeah, well, a carbine, yeah, you could knock them off. Well, not that fast. It was still a single action. If you wanted, well, I'd say I had been to 50 caliber machine gun school, and I knew, and I'd fired the 30 caliber, the 45. One of my favorites, though, when we were in Belgium, was a grease gun. That's a submachine gun, a very cheap looking. That's what I called it, a grease gun.
Right, it's the American version of the British Sten gun, which was very small and lightweight. And
yeah, but but it didn't. It was but it didn't fire. Brrr, boom, boom,
Yep.
boom, boom, boom.
Okay, now let's get back into your story here. Your unit is kind of going up into the line. Now with the artillery, then you're not right up necessarily with the infantry.
No,
right
we're
up
not
front.
right up front. But they wanted us to watch out for infiltration.
Right.
But it's interesting, when we were in Germany at one point, when the Germans were in retreat, our artillery outfit was the first. The tanks were behind us. So you never knew what would happen.
Right. Okay. Now, how long was it before the artillery started to go into action then?
Well, I beg your pardon?
How long was it before you started to actually use the artillery?
Immediately. You use artillery immediately.
All right.
You don't keep artillery in reserve. You keep infantry in reserve. But the artillery goes. So they started that next morning. They started firing. I remember our battery commander comes out to register. He went to register the battery. That's called registering. When they fire and the shell lands where they hoped it would land, you've registered the battery, and they have what they call a K, a correction. In other words, they think you have to aim here.
Right.
But when you aim here, it's not landing here, so you may be off 5 degrees, so they give a K where they realize they're off. So our captain registered the battalion, and I think it took him God knows how many rounds. I say it got very cold and bitterly cold. The snow used to crack under your feet.
Now, were you sleeping outside or in tents, or what did you have?
We
at
would
that point?
sleep in houses if we could. That was the advantage of the artillery. You could sleep in houses. Sometimes we could sleep in a barn. Our battalion commander was very solicitous of his men. So he would always try to get a spot where there were some houses around.
Right.
Now the gun crews couldn't. They had to be next to the guns, so they slept in tents.
Right.
But anybody who wasn't on the gun crew could get in a house. And there was a time when we were getting into Germany. The Germans were in retreat. And since we were in a headquarters battery, we supplied the driver for the colonel, lieutenant colonel actually, and other things. And this driver was describing once, colonel couldn't make it. He was stuck. Couldn't get into the next town. It was too far away. And the last town he couldn't stay because he would have been out of range. So we had to stop someplace, and he had a high voice in his driver describing, "My men have to sleep in the woods tonight." And I remember one night I slept in the truck.
Okay. Now, what were your actual duties at the point when the battalion is actually in action? What did you have to do?
We would go out. The survey party would go out first. It was a survey party, which was the survey section, the battalion commander, the captain of headquarters battery. They decide where we're going to set up the CP, where they're going to set up the mess truck. The guns usually went right in. And after the guns were in, we had a survey to the guns to get them located on the map. So we would go out, the survey party would go out, and the other guys were jealous because since we were the first there, we would take the best house. And what room would you take if you had a house to pick? The kitchen. Because all those Europeans had these big wooden stoves.
Right.
And so you could cook or whatever you wanted. So we would go out that way, and included in our group was the mess sergeant, because he had to decide where, and the mess sergeant was an interesting character. He and another guy had gotten in from the paratroops, and they said they were injured. The mess sergeant claimed he hurt his back jumping. This other guy had hurt his back, and he jumping, and he seemed to be honest. And he said about the mess sergeant, "Don't listen to him." The reason they kicked him out of the paratroops, he was too yellow to jump and too big to push. And he was scared. You know, he was a big guy, but he was scared. He had to take sleeping pills from the doctor. And we were there once looking at the survey, and the Germans sent time fire over the house. And what happened, nobody wants to make the first move. There's some sort of a code of honor. You don't be the first one to run, especially with all those guys. So we're waiting there, the time fire is coming, and finally our captain says, "Let's go dig Parks out of the dirt." He was the best sergeant, and we all beat it.
All right. Now, when you're aside once you've sort of done the survey and you've located the battery and so forth, then what else did you have to do at that point?
We'd hide. The thing was, when we finished the survey, you hide, because they put you on guard duty. They always caught you.
But until the battery moved again, then did you have anything else you had to do, or was that
No,
it?
they put us on,
Yeah, guard duty. Yeah.
we hide. That what we learned how to do.
Okay.
Yeah, till they moved.
Okay. Now, how regularly did you move once you got into action there in Belgium?
It varied. We were in one place for 10 days. That's when we were under we were in the American. We were the northern sector was under
Yeah.
Montgomery's
Right.
control, and then there was a southern sector. We were in the northern sector. We didn't move much,
Right.
and finally that's when we moved around. Then we went to other places. We what is the word? We relieved a unit of the 101st Airborne at a place called Aberfontaine, I recall. That's when they had that thing at Bastogne.
Right.
Bastogne was liberated, but the Germans weren't giving up so fast.
Yeah, the Germans withdrew relatively slowly, and they stayed in
In
front of
fact,
Bastogne into
we
January.
had a lot of casualties, and I read later that Patton wanted to attack the flanks of the Bulge, but Eisenhower didn't believe in it. He wanted a head-on assault, and so we had a tremendous number of casualties, and the Germans fought us house to house all the way back to the German
Right.
border. They didn't give up.
Yeah, it was.
They were licked, but they didn't give up, and they fought.
Yeah. And the fighting on that sector pretty much continued from there on out, all the way back to the Rhine and then across it and
Yes,
so forth.
we went back to the Rhine gradually. Well, first, I'm trying to think. When did we cross the? Yeah.
Rhine would be in March.
Oh, first after that, they sent us to Holland for a while, and that was a quiet sector. And they said, "Oh, we're putting you in a quiet sector." Yeah, we heard of the quiet sector, like the Bulge. That was a
Right,
nice
right.
quiet sector. And then they moved us up to the Rhine, and we were under Montgomery's control then. And they had the British, they loved the smoke, artificial smoke. And we had 56 battalions of field artillery all running through our little fire direction. And they were going to, that was at Wessel, I think the
Wessel,
Germans
yeah,
called it. And they were supposed to have the assault the next day. And that morning the guns opened up. There were 600 guns opening. We were in a house, and the plaster was falling, and the air was full of smoke. But they went through, and they did such a good job that 2 days later we were running short of shells. They had a railroad running across the pontoon bridge, and they were delivering. And what was the first thing the railroad brought? Coca-Cola. And that's when we got into Germany.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the impressions that you had of Holland and Belgium. What were the areas you were in like?
And mostly it was farm country. And according to the Dutch, the Germans had taken everything from them. This was the same story. They'd taken their cows and taken whatever you can imagine.
Right.
And they mentioned, we were in Holland. It was April, cold, bitter. And we said to them, "What kind of weather do you have here?" They all spoke English. And this one Dutchman says to us, "We have 9 months of winter and 3 months of no summer." And also it was interesting, they had very rarely seen black soldiers. And the black soldiers were driving the quartermaster trucks. And they came into this town, and they saw the black soldiers were funny. They saw these people were very curious. So they gunned their engines to make them backfire. And they were having a good time. And the people, "What are those?" They'd come up, "What are those?" So, well, the black soldiers. "Well, are they good for?" It was interesting with the black soldiers, even in the States. It was something that struck me. In the States, well, when I was in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, my parents came down to visit me.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had been in the South. She had relatives. So
Mm-hmm.
she had been in Nashville once.
Right.
But my father was amazed. Colored waiting room, colored fountain.
Right.
He said, I never saw this. Well, my mother had. And then what bothered us, we were on I don't know, we were going from one place on a day, we weren't on duty.
Mm-hmm.
But I forgot where I was on a bus, and a bunch of all Americans, GIs, and I guess they were mostly from New York and whatnot. And then this black soldier got on the bus, and he had to sit in the back, and they all started yelling. Why does he have to sit in the back? He's wearing the same uniform we are. So this black soldier went like this stuff. And another time, I think I was at Camp Breckenridge, I don't remember. There was, Camp Breckenridge had the 92nd Division, an all-black division with white officers. I don't think they had many black officers. There were a few, but there was post guard duty, and the 92nd had post guard duty. That included guarding the nurses' quarters, but the nurses were all white, of course. So because of that, they had to have 3 white privates of the guard to guard the nurses' quarters. The black soldiers were not allowed to guard the nurses' quarters, so I was one of the 3 privates of the guard. We were in the guardhouse with the black soldiers who were on guard duty, but they did not guard the nurses' quarters, we did. And I thought, what's going on here? And then when I was coming home, we came home on an aircraft carrier. And one of the sailors came up to me, and he says, one of your officers said, here, sailor, take my bag. And I said to him, sir, we have end for that.
Yeah, because the Navy was segregated.
Yeah, they were mess
precisely that way.
boys.
Yeah.
Mess boy,
That sort of thing. Yeah. And it was often something of a culture shock for Northern soldiers to go and see that.
Now,
or
I
to
felt
encounter it in
also
the Army.
sorry for the black soldiers because most of the training camps were in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to experience this stuff. The ones that came from the North had to experience
Right.
this white waiting room and colored waiting room and other stuff. It was, you wonder why more didn't desert.
But the connection to civil rights movement starting after the war becomes
Well, it was Harry
obvious.
Truman.
Yeah.
Yet there were some black outfits. Well, the 92nd Division was all black, but the morale was low. I understand they broke in Italy. But we had a tank destroyer outfit that were with us once, and they had won a presidential citation.
Yeah. Yeah. General, the ones with the better training and equipment leadership
Yeah.
did real well.
Yeah,
And
they
there
were
were
treated
several-
as men, they were acted as men.
Right. Okay, and that gets us back in again, so you were kind of in the Netherlands and so forth. Now, you cross into Germany then in the spring of 45. How is Germany different from being in Belgium
They're
or
much
Holland?
richer. Their houses were much nicer. They, of course, the interesting thing, when we get into a town, all white, they had bed sheets out. Wherever you went, they were represent your white flag. It looked like a parade or something. You came in, and you never met one who was a Nazi. Nicht Nazi! So what we would do, we would take the best house in town,
Is that the camera?
kick them out. That was nice. But you could see they had better plumbing, they had better facilities and whatnot. And then they had a non-fraternization rule. They weren't allowed to fraternize with the Germans. It was
Right.
I don't know, it's hard to say.
So,
But I remember after the fighting was over, they had us guarding some hospitals that we had overrun. They were full of German wounded.
right.
So we made it instead of 2 on and 4 off, 2 on and 6 off on the guard duty. And so it came out, you're always on the same post at the same time. And this was early morning, and I remember the German doctor, I think he was a major, and I was on duty, and he'd come out every day, and he'd salute. Well, we were told not to salute. So he would salute, we'll look at him. And then there was a farmer. They would have their livestock, they would have them out in the fields, and at night they bring them back into town and put them in a barn. And every morning this guy would come out with a huge bull, a monster. And he had a bag over a burlap bag over the bull's eyes. And I was, what happens if that bag falls off? I'm dead. So it was a routine. He would come by, the farmer would come down, I would take my carbine out and point it at him. Actually pointed at him like this all the way. And he knew if the bag fell off, he was dead.
Now, did you have much contact beyond that with the Germans while you were still there after the war was over?
Very little with the contact. They'd come up and they ask questions sometimes, but and of course we would go into the towns, but they had most of them run away. And I remember this woman came up. There was a bazooka dud in her driveway. What did she do? Well, call the engineers. And then one they would try to talk to us, you know, and I saw they were raiding the garbage cans. They were in bad shape.
Now, did the Army make a point of making sure that the soldiers then knew about all the stuff the Nazis had done with the death camps and all of that? Did the Army make a point of making sure all the soldiers knew about all of the things the Nazis had done during the war?
Yes. How much? Well, we didn't know about the concentration camps, but I remember when we were back in, after that, they had us, before we were waiting to go to Japan, they had us in France. And Eisenhower ordered everybody to see the films of the concentration camps. So we all saw it.
Right.
And we had some German prisoners there. We made them watch it. Propaganda. That's what they said.
Now you mentioned, so how long did you actually stay in Germany then?
I was in Germany, let's see, well, we were in Germany until late spring, April. They surrendered.
They surrendered in May.
VE Day.
It's about May 8th or 9th
VE
or so.
Day, May, we were in Germany.
Right.
We were outside these hospitals, and they had the radio on, and we heard Churchill announcing. So, the thing. And then not long after that, we went into France at a redeployment camp.
Right.
And there they gave us, it was very nice. It wasn't the greatest, we slept in tents, but they gave us, I had a 3-day pass to Paris. A couple of times I had passes to Paris. I had a 3-day pass to Paris. I came back from a 3-day pass, and that's the way the Army does things. And the sergeant in charge, or whoever he was at the time, there was nobody around. Hey, Shapin, would you like to go to Switzerland in furlough? I said, came back, yeah, I'll go. So it was $25 for the trip, a 7-day all-expense trip to a tour of Switzerland, and you're allowed to bring in $25 to spend. So the morning of, I think the day of the Japanese surrender, VJ Day, I was on a train to Switzerland. And I understand when the captain came back, he says, he just came back on a 3-day pass to Paris, and then you give him a 7-day furlough to Switzerland. And we got into Switzerland, and I was listening to the radio. They had arranged, the Japanese had surrendered, and then they were supposed to send a plane to Tokyo to make final arrangements. So the pilots asked Admiral Halsey, well, you know, the Japanese have been very tricky in the past. What happens if they pull some stunt? So Admiral Halsey said, shoot them down in a friendly fashion. The trip to Switzerland was very nice. We had, it was a tour. And I remember the first time a day was in Lucerne. It was a nice hotel, but nothing. Well, the next day we ended up in a very fancy. The guide would come around. It was a Swiss. Who wants to go to this hotel? Who? And he give you a card. Who knew? So the next time we ended up in a lovely hotel in a place called Stadt. It was a beautiful building. So the next day on the train, the guide would come around. Who wants to go to this? What hotel? And we saw in the morning who's there. The guide. The light went on.
There you go.
So, who would like to go to this? Well, what hotel are you going to? Well, I'm going to this. We'll go there too. Because we went to one on Lake Geneva, Montreux it was. Oh, it was gorgeous. And that was the first time any of us ever seen, what do they call it, a douche bowl in the hotel. A bidet.
Bidet, that's it.
Bidet is the correct word. We'd never seen a bidet. So, what is it? Well, maybe it's to wash your socks. No, it doesn't seem right. Well, I finally figured it out.
Okay, the tape here is out. Just about out. So, all right. Okay. So we've had you making the grand tour of Switzerland and so forth. Now, once you came back from that, how much longer did you stay in France?
I think till September. And then we had an offer. If you had been in college before, the United States Army ran 2 colleges where you could go while you're waiting to go home and get college credit. One of them was Shapin, England, which is near Oxford, I believe. And the other one was in Biarritz, France. So my buddy Kenny, we both had the option, and we were both accepted. So I said, where do you want to go? Well, he says, you know, the French, they don't like Americans. And, let's go to Shapin in England. That was nice. But then I found out Biarritz is a resort.
Yep.
Of course, this was September. You weren't going to go swimming in late September. But it was nice. We had passes to London every weekend, and you had to attend class. There was only one restriction. If you missed a class, if you cut a class, you could be court-martialed. But there wasn't too much to do. We played football in the morning, and the guys hung around, and the food was very, very good. And we were waiting to go home. And finally, we were supposed to go home on, I think, on an aircraft carrier, a Wasp. And there was a storm, and the Wasp was damaged, so no go. But they sent another aircraft carrier, the Lake Champlain, and we went home on the Lake Champlain. And we hit 5 storms in 10 days.
Wow.
It was January, and the sailors were throwing up. But as I mentioned earlier, as we were pulling away, I think it was Southampton or someplace, I turned to Ken and I said, it's over. It's over. And we landed in Staten Island. And somehow my father knew somebody, and I think our old doctor was a big, and he got passes for my mother, and for himself, my mother, and for Ken's mother and father to go down and see the ship as it came in. So we met our parents there, and then we had to go to Camp Fort Dix to get out. And they lost our papers. So we were there for 7 days instead of 2 days. But we finally got home, and I remember getting home. I dreamt of this, getting off the train and walking to the house. And when I got there, nothing terrible, it was great.
Yeah.
But they used to have a flag in the window with a blue star. Yeah, the matter with me. And I pulled this flag off and I gave it to my mother. You won't need this anymore.
Yeah.
It's amazing how you can get emotional after
Well,
something
sure.
that happened
Well,
over 60 years.
Yeah. But it was a pretty important thing in an awful lot of different ways.
Yeah.
To back up a little bit, in Fort Dix, were they still? Did you notice if they were still using German prisoners? At
Oh
that
yeah,
point?
they had German prisoners giving, we got supposed to have a steak dinner. And the Germans were there. And it's like, come on, that's not enough, because they weren't used to that.
Oh.
Let's see.
Let's see. Now, you talked a little bit about observing aircraft in action, so forth, over the Bulge. You mentioned B-17s, which should have been very high flying.
But you could see them.
Yeah.
You could see them.
Yeah.
They were off, but you could see them coming through. And I saw you could see the ACAC coming through.
Right. Right.
Also, when we crossed the Rhine, the Germans had one plane trying to knock out, I don't know what. They used to call him Bitchik Charlie. And all the lights, the searchlights were on him, and he'd be in and out, and they were shooting up, and it was a great show. They never hit him.
Okay. And did you see night fighters in action too, or
I beg your
did
pardon?
you see night fighters in action?
No. The Germans didn't have much Air Force left.
Right.
But we had two Piper Cub observation
Right.
planes. And the Germans would try to shoot these guys down, and they couldn't because these guys could turn and whatnot.
I actually did interview somebody who was a pilot for one of those, and so
Yeah.
forth, and a lot of them did get shot down.
Yes, but most of them got away with it. We had one, remember, with Fort Bragg. They used to take off in a baseball field across from the barracks, and one day he hit a wire, and he landed nose up. The nose went into a barracks window, and the plane was like that, and the pilot just got a bloody nose and walked away.
Yeah.
In fact, there was one time in Belgium where the pilots were taking guys up for a ride, but then he had to stop. They're running out of gas. Also, there was other stuff. The soldiers like to loot. Looting was a problem. Let's take anything.
Right.
But I was looking. The Germans used to give out an award called a Mutter Medal. If you had so many children for the Führer. So every time I got into a house, I started looking and looking. I want to bring one home for my mother as a souvenir. Finally, one house, forget it. I'm not looking. This one guy comes in, and he walks into the drawer, and he says, "Look what I found!"
Are there other kind of individual incidents or things that kind of stick out in your mind from that experience in Europe?
In Europe, well, I'm trying to think outside the combat. They used to give us combat rations, PX rations. In other words, cigarettes, cigars, candy.
Right.
The minute the fighting stopped, that was the end of it. And I didn't smoke. But a couple of them smoked, so I used to trade them for candy. And some of them were really hooked on cigarettes.
Right.
Cigarettes were also a medium of exchange in Germany. You could get anything. And in England, of course, when we were in England, the prostitutes were all over the place. They'd come up to you. They'd bump up against you. I remember we asked them, "What do you do? How do you get into this racket?" Oh, they had these stories. I was going out with this American flyer, and he got shot down, and now I have a baby, so I'm on me back for me baby.
Yeah. It was an experience that certainly dislocated a lot of lives, and whether that was the right story or not, who
And
knows?
of course, Paris, they were all over the place.
Now, if you're going on a 3-day pass to Paris, where would you stay?
The Red Cross taking over certain hotels, and you could stay there for a few cents almost. That's where you'd stay. It was interesting when guys would go. I remember guys would go on pass, we had a lot of fellows from the South.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had a different way of looking at things. So I remember a fellow going to, getting a pass. He comes back and one of these soldiers says to him, well, did you have a good time? Oh, yeah, very nice time. Did you get drunk? No. Did you have a woman? No. So how could you have a good time?
To look back at the whole thing now, I mean, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you? Either how you think about things or view the world or other ways?
It gave me a view. I'm conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pro-military. I can understand today people who are opposed to the war in Iraq. All right, it's a free country.
Mm-hmm.
You think we did the wrong thing, or we didn't do the right thing, or we're stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But attacking recruiting stations,
Mm-hmm.
to me, is treason.
Mm-hmm.
I remember what they did to the soldiers in Vietnam.
Yeah.
They spit on them.
Mm-hmm.
These poor slobs were in it, and in Vietnam they were drafted.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want of these guys? And they, you know, it was Rudyard Kipling's Tommy Atkins.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's Tommy this and Tommy that, you know, and things, you know, they say, he says how they treat him, you know, it's
Mm-hmm.
Tommy this and Tommy that, but when things get bad, it's Mr. Atkins, please.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I feel, the way some of these people, I don't like this business where they're going after recruiting stations, and I don't know what this idiot that bombed the recruiting station, and this code pink that demonstrates in front, for crying out loud, whose country is it? My feeling today is there were some people who hate this country. Really, just, you know, hate it, and I love it. It's a place where my fellow Jews aren't persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them came here to escape.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, everybody's been persecuted. The Italians have been persecuted. The Irish have been persecuted.
Yeah.
The blacks have been persecuted. They have it hardest because you can't, in other words, if you're of Italian descent,
Mm-hmm.
you don't stand out, but if you're black, they see who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So they've had it bad, no question about it. But things have changed. I think this country is good. We've tried to correct our errors. Yes, we made errors. Everybody makes errors.
And there hasn't been another war of the size of the one
Yes.
you were in since then either.
Yeah, there hasn't been.
So on some level, someone got something right in there.
Well, I read something the other day about the Democratic Party is falling apart because they used to concentrate on hating Bush, but he's not going to be there anymore.
Right.
The way to save the Democratic Party is to repeal the 22nd Amendment so they can re-elect Bush. And if they re-elect Bush, that'll bring the Democratic Party back together again.
All right. Well, on that particular pearl of wisdom, I think we'll close the interview. Thank you very much for talking
You're
to me
welcome.
today. All right. Yeah. I think one of the things that in the end